Hello there.
Eric Idle, an absolute treat. Can you believe 55 years since Monty Python burst to life on British TV screens?
The first people who had it after England was Canada, and I imagine shortly after Australia because of the BBC connection. Canada had it in 71, I think.
Yes.
But America didn't get it till 73, 74, much later. They were on PBS.
It started small and it just grew in America, didn't it?
It started, oddly enough, in Dallas. Can you believe that? Dallas was the first place in America to play Monty Python. And it was a guy who put it on. I think we were very cheap, obviously. The BBC was selling things off the back of a van,
But Eric, for something completely surreal, Elvis Presley used to recite Python sketches.
I tell that story actually in my show. But it's true though. It is true because and I actually played the clip that he first saw on American TV, which was actually in 1973 on a show called The Midnight Special.
Yes.
And they ran it, being Americans, for 20 years. It was like hosted by the Bee Gees, would you believe? And we were on we'd come down from Canada where we'd been doing a tour, and they put us on, and we did some sketches and things. And we'd been on the Tonight Show previously, and they hadn't laughed at all. They just they sat there with their mouths open.
Yeah.
But on the Midnight Special, they did laugh, I'm glad to say, because they were young. They were rock and roll audience. I knew that he watched The Holy Grail a lot because he went down to, where was he, Nashville or Memphis? Memphis, right? And he went to the local cinema with his lads at night time.
Yeah.
I don't think they were entitled. I don't think they were very sober. And they played it again and again. But I had not, and then I knew that he had the tapes on his plane. And then I found out in another book, he called everybody Squire after my Nudge Nudge sketch. And that really blew my mind because, he saved our lives at school when he appeared on television. We were 13 or 14 in boarding school. And he just was a life. And I'd just been reading that book on the Beatles, and he changed their lives too. All of our generation's lives were changed by Elvis. So to find out that he calls people Squire took me a long time to understand, really, comprehend.
Yeah. Now, you and John Cleese came up with the Monty Python name, and of course, Eric, there's so many stories as to exactly how. What is the definitive there?
I think the BBC called the show in their contract the Barry Chook's Flying Circus, because Barry Chook was some way involved in organising it. They thought it was just some kind of weird flying circus, and we didn't like. So we kept trying to get names. Michael Palin came up with Gwen Dibley's Flying Circus, and I think I can't remember who said Python. I remember saying Monty because there was a guy in my local pub in Warwickshire called Monty. He was sort of like had a little bow tie, and then people would say, "Has Monty been in? Has Monty been in?" And so it seemed a very funny name to us, and it sort of stuck there. I mean, it was the very last name we gave it because they were still printing the tickets.
Yeah,
we had to give them names just because they were printing the tickets for the audience.
Interesting journey how you all came together. You and John Cleese, Graham Chapman, Terry Jones, Michael Palin first got together as writers on the Frost Report, and then in came Terry Gilliam, as I understand it, while you were working on Do Not Adjust Your Set, and that's as to how the Six Pythons teamed up.
Pretty much so. It's two shows collided. Last the 1948 show, and we were doing a kids show called Do Not Adjust Your Set, which we had Gilliam in. But actually, I just discovered that we pretty much all met in 1963. Because I was at college and I auditioned for two of the goodies. Can you imagine that? My first term. Yeah. And they gave me a sketch written by John Cleese. And I did my first performance with a sketch of his, and he was there. And that's early, like February 1964. I mean, it was extraordinary. And then at the end of that year, I went to the Edinburgh Festival and I met Michael Palin and Terry Jones, who were of the Oxford Review. And during the summer, I met Graham Chapman, who was qualifying to become a doctor. And so we met all of them, with the exception of Terry Gilliam, in 6 years before we started doing that show.
The BBC in 1969 wanted something for a Sunday night. They were kind of trying things. They came to you or you went to them. No one really had much idea as to what was going on. But talk about magic being created literally out of thin air.
It was very odd because we'd been offered a show on ITV by the people who put on our children's show. But they didn't have a studio for about 18 months. So they were going to give us this primetime show about an hour on ITV. And then I think John Cleese and Chapman came and said, look, we've got this offer from the BBC. And I think they, so it was very strange. We thought, oh, well, we'll do that in the meanwhile, But it was odd because the BBC was trying to find out if anybody was watching television at 10:30 on a Sunday night, because they'd just play the Queen, sitting on a horse and turn off. And so they didn't really much care. There were no executives in charge. It was very good. They just let us be, mainly because I think they trusted John Cleese because he was on the Frost Report. So he was already well known. And we were just known as writers, really, and on kids' television.
Yes.
So it was rather marvelous because they didn't pay any attention, and all we really did was make ourselves laugh.
You look at your life now, Eric, and for so many decades, you've been one of the world's most loved comedians, a fabulous writer. There seems to be nothing you can't do. But yet, as is so often the case, your early years were kind of fairly grim. Your dad survived World War II, but then in an astounding twist of terrible misfortune, hitchhiking home for Christmas and died.
In a road accident, yes, absolutely. Ironic, to say the very least. But, yes, it is. It was Christmas time, and they told all the forces to just hitchhike because everybody stopped for the people in uniform in those days. And he was involved in a truck. He was in the back of a load of steel that shifted and crunched him. And he died on Christmas Eve. How about that then?
I'm wondering, Eric, do those grim memories, in a way, shape your sense of humour? Does the applause from the audience kind of blank out the bad stuff?
I think what it does is it shapes who you become. And so it was very interesting because I was sent into a boarding school at 7, and my education was paid for by the RAF. And it wasn't a bad education at all. But what was odd is all the boys at my school, none of them had any dads. That's really strange. So you'd have no respect or fear of anything, really. So I always thought that was the most interesting thing about it. And we were kind of like a gang. And my classmates were a gang. And we never took a straight exam. We'd always steal the exam papers. And they were really quite criminal. We'd go over the wall, we'd get beers, go meet the girls. We had quite a good life going. And so I think it taught you how to survive, which maybe, I don't know quite why comedy would come into that, except I think it stops you being bullied if you make people laugh. It's like telling the truth. That's what comedy is, really. It's just telling the truth.
Yeah.
And then people laugh. Because how dare you say that? Do you know what I mean? And so I think he's often saying the right thing at the wrong time.
I look back to The Life of Brian, 1979, of course. It's been named one of the greatest comedy movies of all time. And if it wasn't for George Harrison, maybe that movie might never have happened because finance was withdrawn and he kind of romped to the rescue, didn't he, in many ways?
Not only did he romp to the rescue, he did the most incredible thing. He mortgaged his house in Friar Park in Henley, this huge estate. He mortgaged his business premises in Knightsbridge to raise the cash from the bank to pay for our movie. It was his last money. He put it on our movie. That's completely bonkers. Who in their right minds would take their money and say, I'm going to put that all on a Monty Python movie? I mean, I don't think people realized at the time that he'd done that because everybody assumed the Beatles had fabulous amounts of money. But of course they didn't. Nobody has $4.5 million cash lying around, let alone, in England after the revenue that had been at them. So I think it was the most incredible act of faith. And I said, why did you do that? And he said, because I wanted to see the movie.
Yeah.
And I think he was such a fan, I think it was incredible. He was an extraordinary man, because if you think about it, what he did was he was the guitarist in the Beatles, right? He single-handedly introduced Indian culture to the West. I mean, that's an extraordinary reach for somebody from Liverpool who plays guitar. He did a lot for my life. I mean, he cheered me up a lot. And he cheered me up by telling me I was going to die, which is, of course, an important thing to remember.
We're all getting there.
Well, no, but I mean, every day, you might die every day. So it's one of those things that if you live a day at a time and feel grateful for being alive, you can actually be quite happy.
Very true. You think of the life of Brian, putting aside, of course, the fact that there was this tremendous kerfuffle in the USA over it because it was deemed blasphemous and so forth. But always look on the bright side of life. It's one of those songs that no matter how low you are, it does not fail to make you smile, Eric.
It's interesting to me because, after all, when you are being crucified, there's very little future to look forward to. I mean, this is a deeply ironic song, if you know what I mean. It is heavy irony, But I think the very fact that we ended the film on it, because we didn't know how to end it otherwise, everybody was being crucified, it sort of ended like, oh, so we'll end with a song, or we'll end with a song. And I wrote that. And to me, it's always been rather wonderful that the other uses of it, like it was in the Gulf War, the RAF bombers, like in the Falklands, when the Sheffield was hit by an Exocet, the sailors sat on the boat for 3 hours and sang it. I love the fact that people requested at their funerals. I think that's really nice. It's a really gives me great joy and delight that they're there for their parents and for themselves and their friends. They sing that. I love that.
How did it come about, and how long did it take to write?
Well, it came about because we didn't know how to end the movie. So we were saying, well, how are we going to end this? And I said, well, we should end with a song. And I said it should be like a Disney song. It should be like a cheery-uppy song. It should be ridiculously cheerful. It should have a whistle. It should be about like, always look on the bright side, And that's what I'd lived. And then I went home and I wrote it quite quickly. While I was waiting to pick up my kid from school, I picked up my guitar and I wrote a little whistle theme. And then I wrote always look on the bright side of life. And that was pretty much it. And then I wrote a verse, and then it didn't take very long to get it together because all those elements were the essence of the song.
Yes.
And so I recorded it, and I took it into the guys next day, and they said, that's it, great, end of the movie, we can go down the pub.
Now, let me take you back, Eric, to 1988 and a little movie called The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, Terry Gilliam directing. But a lot of people think because Robin Williams cameoed in that movie that that's where you connected, but not true. You actually go back years before then, don't you?
I met him in 1980 after he'd finished filming Popeye in Malta, and I knew Shelley Duvall. He said, you've got to come and see Robin. He's playing in town in London. And they took me to the strip club, comic strip, and he was just genius. And I just thought he was the funniest person I'd ever met, and still do. And we went to dinner, and then we just liked each other very much. And then he came and stayed with us in France, and we were pals ever since then, 1980.
2014, his death. It kind of knocked the world off its axis. I just wonder how you deal with something like that.
I mean, like everybody else, close, I kicked myself, but we were actually doing the O2. We were doing Monty Python live at the O2 for 10 days. And I had written, adapted a Python sketch called Blackmail, called Celebrity Blackmail. And every night we had people on, Michael Myers, all sorts of British comedians with a bag over their head, and somebody had to guess who they were. So I wanted Robin for the last night. So finally I reached him. I said, will you come and be on for the last night? We have celebrity guest. And he said, oh, I don't want to perform. And, well, we're in the middle of, I'm directing this thing, so I didn't really think twice. I said, well, never mind, just come to the last night because you love everybody, you know everybody. I mean, we won't be together again. This will be it. And so, but he didn't show up. So it was like a couple of weeks later, I think, Eddie Izzard called from the Edinburgh Festival, and all the comedians were there, and they told me, what had happened. And it was really very, very sad. They asked me to speak at his memorial, and I couldn't really trust myself to speak. So I wrote a song, and my little daughter helped me perform it. And so I actually do that on my stage show. I sing it because it's a very sweet song. It's called Good Night, Robin. And it's a kind of sweet song. And we put pictures up of Robin, and it's nice. It's like a tribute and a goodbye, in a way.
Good night, Robin. Thanks for all the fun. Thanks for all the laughs you brought and all the funny things you done.
You think about your life too. 2019, you got that extraordinary diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, something, of course, most people don't recover from. What kind of jarring effect did that have on you when the doctor said, now listen, Eric, this is what's happening. You've got pancreatic cancer.
Well, it was odd because I've been writing a thing called Death the Musical for about 15 years. And if you ever not want to sell a musical, that's a very good title. I think you can, almost nobody will invest in something called that. So, but still, I'd gone to my doctor and I thought it'd be very funny if the guy writing Death the Musical was dying, finds out he's dying while doing it. And so I said, what's the quickest way to get rid of a character? And he says to me, pancreatic cancer. And I went, oh, that's great. Thanks very much. And I wrote it. And 12 years later, it's the same doctor. And we're looking at a screen and I say, what's that? And he says, pancreatic cancer. And so I laughed because it's so perfect. I mean, it's like the writer trying to write about a writer trying to write. I mean, it was just such a wonderful moment of irony that I laughed, I'm afraid. But I was very fortunate because he was very clever and he spotted it from a blood test. I was in to see this inside the surgeon about 7 or 8 days, and he was a brilliant surgeon. And I'm here 5 years later. I'm here, and I feel I was very blessed, and I had a great reprieve.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, going public with it as you did, and with such candor, Eric, you've helped raise a whole lot of money for people in a similar situation. So out of your situation, that fortunately had a good resolution, comes a lot of goodness.
I was happy to do that because I felt that what I couldn't, it wasn't just helpful to help raise money, and which is good because there are lots of people who are raising money. It also helped raise people's spirits and say there is a chance. This is not the incurable thing we think it is, and it's been going up every year. I'm happy to say because people now know which blood test to look for. They now know to trace early. They now know they've got to move fast, and so we are gradually defeating the monster one because this is the worst of those cancers. This is the real. I feel happy to be able to help that happen. It's like the least you can do after all when you're in my position to have got away with that thing. Skin of your teeth. I was glad I said, oh, you've got to come out with this. You've got to tell people because this is nothing to hide. This is something we can actually share in and enjoy. Because even people who've lost people. And so I go and meet the people, I go a couple of charities. I go there, they have marches and, they have walks and rallies and things. And I'm happy to meet my surgeon there. And, I feel good about that too.
Of course. You've got a lot going on in your life right now. For instance, the Spamalot Diaries is coming shortly, your new book. So we look forward to that. Spamalot, of course, a tour de force seen by something like 25 million and counting all around the world. There was to be a movie, Eric. What happened there, if you can explain?
It wasn't very well accepted by some of the Pythons, and it took a long time to get it going. And unfortunately, Casey Nicholaw spent 5 years trying to direct it, and he had some really good stuff. But the good news is that it came back in the theatre.
Yes.
Like last year, again on Broadway.
Yeah.
I'd rather have that any time than a movie, to be honest, because it was just to see him play twice open on Broadway. It was just wonderful. I mean, I was in tears most of the evening.
Oh, of course, and it travels the world. You know, it's played here in Australia several times and always to packed houses. Speaking of packed houses, speaking of you on the stage and speaking of Australia and New Zealand, you are heading our way very soon, Eric Idle, just to tantalise your Aussie fans. And you've got such an Aussie connection because your son, Carrie, I think, lives on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, doesn't he?
Absolutely, he does, yes. My first wife was a Sheila.
Oh, yes, that's right. Your first wife was an Australian actress, Lynn Ashley.
From Townsville, Queens.
Anyway, so what can fans expect?
Well, it's a bit of a one-man musical. You told some of the stories I was going to tell. I didn't know I've got some slightly other bits of the Elvis story. I do thank George because I think that was an extraordinary thing that he did. It would nobody would have made that film. I went with the producer to New York and to Hollywood, and nobody was interested at all. And I still think they wouldn't have been interested. I think it was just one of those extraordinary things. So I thank him a lot, and I do a bit of a song for him. And so it's like a bit of music, a bit of comedy, some films, some clips. You know, keep them. And a couple of big surprise guests who appear.
I'm guessing, too, a lot of beautiful memories of the likes of Graham Chapman, who left us, back in 1989. I know he was a close buddy of yours. And Terry Jones, who left in 2020 after dealing with dementia. I know there's a big push to get a statue in Terry Jones's honour up, isn't there, in Colwyn Bay?
And I've been helping that, and I think it's a great idea. I think they've certainly got at least half the money they need to raise, but you can contribute if you want to. I think it's terrific. We all hope, of course, it'll be Terry playing the nude organ.
Oh, look, I just want to say something too, Eric, just to kind of wrap up here, because I know there's been a lot of focus recently on you and John Cleese and whatever. And the thing is, people sometimes don't understand in showbiz, you can't be best friends with everyone, can you? That's simply the way of life.
Absolutely. And also, it's not really, it wasn't like a group of friends. This was a group of colleagues.
Yeah.
And what was extraordinary, it fitted and we worked so well. I mean, I've known John for 61 years. You know, I've known them all for 61 years, except for Gilliam, it's like maybe just a little less. It's a long time. It's a lot of life, you know, and people are different and change. And we actually haven't worked. I mean, I think the last time I toured Australia, I came with John and we did we had a lot of fun on the road.
You have tremendous chemistry and energy and all of that, but it doesn't mean you're having picnics in the backyard every day, does it?
No, he's not my first choice for a picnic in the backyard.
No. One last tantalisation for your Aussie fans who I know are going to flock to see your show right round the country. Carrie Fisher, she rented your house. Are you going to tell that story about what happened when you had that big party?
You've been reading my script, haven't you? No, but there's a very famous picture that keeps going on the internet. So I'm telling the true story of that, behind that picture. It's of Harrison Ford. And yeah, so yes. I've got some anecdotes and some bits and some comedy. It's a bit of a mix of the evening. It's like a one musical, really. And I even have a band on screen. So there.
Oh my gosh, it reminds me of that story of the knitted penis when you were making that that movie.
Exactly. So these Italian ladies knitted me a penis that went with the thighs. I think I still have that somewhere in a drawer. I might bring it out again on stage. You never know.
Thank you so much, Eric. Can't wait to see.
All right. Nice to see you too.